there's an emerging and troubling trend as it relates to Americans' trust in government. According to the Pew Research Center, it's at a historic low of only 20%, with more Americans feeling as if their elected officials are more interested in serving their own separate and personal interests rather than representing them and doing the job they were elected to do. Matthew Dowling served as a state representative for the 51st Legislative District of Fayette and Somerset Counties in Pennsylvania. During his tenure, he focused on building communities where businesses and people had a chance to thrive. He served for 3 terms or 6 years, but Dowling readily admits that the pressure of the office got to him, and he eventually withdrew his name because, despite the fact that he knew he could win again, he just wasn't up for another legislative fight. Make no mistake, he is immensely proud of the legislative accomplishments he was able to garner for the people of his district, but he does agree that the current political system could stand to endure an extreme makeover of epic proportions to get government working for people once again. I sat down with Dowling to have a reflective conversation about his time in office, his accomplishments, the current state of government, and how it gets fixed in America to work for the people it's intended to serve. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited that you are my first interview of the new year, and I get to talk to you all about business and politics. Great to be with you this morning, and thanks so very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Matthew, I know that you served in the Pennsylvania legislature, and I know that you've got some interesting views on the state of American politics. So my first question this morning has to do with restoring civility in American politics, because when you look at it, it's kind of at a fractured state. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, what do you think it'll take to restore the civility of American politics?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for asking me that question. You know, that's something that's really near and dear to my heart. The fact that there is no longer civility in politics. And I also want to be sure not to over romanticize the past, saying that there were these great times when people could debate. But in the history of the United States, kind of in the formation, you saw different political parties that were able to work together to accomplish goals. And we also saw more political parties than we see today, where we're really just, we've become a two-party system. The base has become very polarized, where a lot of those people who are leaning left have gone to the far left, and we have extremists on the far right. And the climate has become so polarized that it's hard to have conversations between those two factions. And therefore, debating important issues doesn't really happen in the traditional sense. We automatically look at it as, that's the other side, they're wrong, I'm right, and we kind of go from there. What I would like to see happen is civil debate restored. And by that, I mean, the discussion of ideas and opportunities. We can disagree with each other. The basis is that we both know that there's a problem. Let's say, for example, the problems with education. We both say the education problem is fractured or is broken. One side thinks that we should fix it one way. The other side thinks we should fix it another way. For example, putting more money into education may be one side's view, and school choice may be the other side's view. We can have differing opinions, but still be humane to each other as the way we discuss and debate those. And really, that's the reason why I started my podcast, Commonalities, to open up a venue where those conversations can take place.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your podcast. I know the premise of the show is to have uncomfortable conversations about important issues. And one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast is I wanted to have conversations to move the needle of progress forward in a whole variety of societal issues. So I know that's a big part of what you do through your podcast as well, isn't it?
It is. And like I said, this is a place where, kind of a safe ground where people can come and they can debate the issues. On some episodes, we have the yin and the yang, both sides of the issue. On other episodes, we focus more on one side than the other. But I always say that, if we have a right-leaning episode and someone has a left-leaning opinion, I'm always happy to do an episode with the other side at a future date and time. But we want to open up those conversations. Listen, our tagline on the show is politics, religion, and finances, everything your grandmother told you not to discuss with friends. And literally, growing up, my grandmother would say, don't bring up that issue. You don't want to make your friends uncomfortable. But if we can't discuss the hard issues with our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues, how do we want to have this debate on a statewide or a national level? We have to be able to be a little bit uncomfortable, to step outside of our shell, to listen to other people's point of views, and to eloquently express our point of view. If we don't have the conversations, then nothing ever comes of the solution.
Yeah, Matthew, one of the things that I always say is diversity of perspective is an asset, isn't it?
It is. And the feedback that we get from others is a gift. And we have to approach it as such.
Absolutely. Matthew, as you know, they're holding a vote for Speaker of the House later this afternoon. And, we're entering a 2-year cycle of divided government. And I suspect one of the reasons we're doing that is that the American public is frustrated with the way American politics is currently working, as we discussed. So I'm fascinated to get your thoughts on the state of American politics as we enter a new Congress and a divided government.
I wonder, and I look both at the national level and here at the state level in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have situations where, we are going to have divided government. The numbers are going to be much closer. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania right now, we are at a statistical tie in the Pennsylvania House between Democrats and Republicans. We have 3 special elections that are going to play out. If I had a crystal ball, I would tell you that those 3 House seats are going to end up with Democrats, and therefore they will end up with the majority. But right now, at a statistical tie, There's a real question that I have, which is being this close, if you're one member up or one member down, is it going to force people to work together more, or are we going to see a polarized, fractioned government that is unable to get anything done because there's no majority or supermajority that exists? And I would hope that the fact that we have closer numbers, that we have to come to a closer consensus, and that way we can get some work done. My fear is that because things are so close and you don't have votes to lose within your own party, that it's going to make things extremely difficult for either side to get anything accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you authored the book Empowered in Pittsburgh, which is a self-help book for young professionals starting their career and sort of navigating adulthood. So tell me about the book and the new one that you're working on as well, because I know you're a busy guy. So tell me all about this book and the current one that you're working on as well.
So Empowered in Pittsburgh is a book that I helped to co-author. There were a number of young professionals, and this goes back about 10 years. So I was still young at that point in time. I hadn't aged quite this amount. But the premise of the book is that a friend of mine, Tom Baker, who is a very accomplished public speaker and a politician as well, as a nonprofit executive, Tom had just moved back to the Pittsburgh area after college, and he found a lot of his friends that were extremely active in college. They ran clubs and organizations and student government. Now they had drifted into adulthood, and they were going, to happy hour every day, to a bar and having several drinks and then going home, and they weren't becoming established members of their community. They were just kind of living up their early 20s. So a number of young professionals like myself got together and we each wrote a chapter of the book. And there are kind of some breadcrumbs and advice for young professionals who are entering their career on how to get engaged in your community, how to take control, how to get a seat at the table. Because, if you don't establish yourself in your early 20s, you can't be in a leadership role in your 30s and 40s. And that's the premise of the book, Empowered in Pittsburgh. It's been used by several universities as a freshman orientation type book, so that those young people get that message and will hopefully achieve some leadership role in the future. But it was a pleasure working on that book. The book that I'm working on now is, I fell from the mountain halfway up. Where do I go from here? And it's kind of a memoir of my time in public office. I've been very open about the fact that while I enjoyed being a public servant, a lot of the stress got to me. I unfortunately exercised my stress relief in unhealthy ways. I began drinking and eventually had a problem with addiction. And that's one of the reasons why I withdrew my name and I decided not to run for re-election this fall. We had already gotten through the primary election. Things looked good for me, but I wasn't the best version of myself. So I fell from that mountain that I had been climbing. But now is the time to stop and assess and say, where do I go from here? So that book's going to be about life lessons, avoiding addiction, and some of the personal stories that I have of my time in public office.
Yeah, sometimes I'm glad you brought that up, Matthew, because sometimes, people that are like public officials don't realize that they are actual people with emotions and feelings, and they feel the pressure of the office that they hold. So I'm curious, since you brought it up, when you look at public service, how important is it for you to find your inner center in terms of what you believe in, but also balancing your personal and professional life. How important do you think that is?
I think it's extremely important. And, I want to say that if you're a person that has the courage to put your name on a ballot and to allow your friends and neighbors to elect or to not elect you, I give you huge props, no matter if you are a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, regardless of party. I think there are good people out there that run for public office that just want to make their communities a little better than they found them. The problem is that there is an immense amount of pressure with public office. And I don't care if it's a township supervisor, if it's a mayor of a small city, if it's a state representative or state senator like myself. I had 68,000 constituents, and at the same time, I had 68,000 bosses that I was trying to please. I couldn't go into a Home Depot or a Walmart without someone recognizing me and telling me what their problem or issue was. On one side, I absolutely loved that and enjoyed that. On the other side, there's a time when you want to unplug and be with family and just go to the grocery store. I think public servants are at a huge disadvantage where they're not able all the time to live their private life the way they want to, because they're always on, they're always in public. And then there's the stress of the job where, I always told people we had to be a subject matter expert in absolutely everything, because in the same day, I could be voting on tax reform for small business, education reform, and something completely different that was happening, like election reform. And so you had to be a subject matter expert in all three of those things. So there's a lot of stress with that as you're doing research and reading the bills. You can blow that off and you could say it's not important. I'll just kind of go with the flow, follow the party line. But at the end of the day, if you want to debate and you want to successfully voice the concerns of your constituents, you have to do some prep and some research in a multitude of areas. And so I think mental health is a huge concern for politicians. Also, election cycles are short. I was on a 2-year cycle. So by the time you got done with one election, it was time to start running for the next election. And elections themselves have become very polarizing. I always use the example that there could be one vote, and that vote could be criminal justice reform. And I could vote yes on criminal justice reform. And the idea is that individual has served their time and paid their debt to society. And we want to give them ways to re-engage within the community and become productive citizens instead of, just receiving a government check and kind of being a drain on society. So that's the reason why we need to reform criminal justice. So you can either say I am against those individuals and want them to live off of the government dime, or you can say that I'm soft on crime. So it doesn't matter if I vote yes or no. You can make a negative out of any vote that I take. And we as politicians have become very bad at that. We speak in sound bites and we use those negatives on mail pieces that we send out during election time. So all of that adds to the stress of being a public servant. And so I give huge props and thanks to the people that put their names on the ballot and allow the public to elect them to office and then successfully serve their constituency.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Matthew, I'm going to share just a bit about myself. So I was born with a spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. So that means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. And I know that for you during your time serving your constituents in Pennsylvania, you're focused a lot on building inclusive communities and where communities and business could thrive. So I'm wondering your thoughts on inclusivity when it comes to politics, and if you could reflect upon your time in office and really wanting to build communities and businesses where everyone has a chance to thrive? I'm fascinated to get your answer there.
I think what you're getting at is diversity in politics. And listen, there are still a lot of old white men that are politicians, and that's something that we need to change. But we are slowly seeing that where we have people of different ethnicities, minorities that are being elected to public office. We are seeing a huge rise of women that are breaking the glass ceiling. So if there's one positive thing that's happening in politics right now, I believe it is a diversification of the people that are elected to represent us. And you have to remember, in a representative republic, those individuals need to speak for their entire community. So, if my community is made up of 7% African Americans, even though I am an adult white male, I need to be able to speak for that 7% of the population. People with disabilities, I need to be able to speak for them. We are very luckily, like I said, seeing rapid diversification of the type of people who are running for office. But to fix that problem, we need to start talking with young people about the importance of public service and getting them who have a broad, diverse background interested in politics and willing to serve and to put their name on that ballot, as I keep saying, when they get a little bit older. So we have to start with the youth of America and get them interested. We don't just want one circle of individuals that come from the same background to continue to be engaged in the political discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually my next question, and how we get more young people interested in politics under the current political climate. What do you think the keys are there in getting more young people interested in pursuing a career in politics?
I think the first thing we have to do is we need to start having civil conversations, and this goes back to my show Commonalities, in public with people that we disagree with. And I say that it needs to be civil. We don't need to scream at each other. We don't need to exacerbate the far left and the far right like the media tends to do for ratings. We need to just have civil conversations and not be afraid to talk politics and talk the big issues. And we need to start that at an even younger age. I was involved in forensics and debate, in high school. And I think, activities like that for young people can lead them to having important conversations, to developing their mindset and their personal beliefs. And then, I think that will encourage them to engage in the political process as they get a little bit older.
Yeah, and Matthew, one of the things that I wanted to go back to is sort of the state of federal politics for just a second, because as you know, Nancy Pelosi is stepping away from her position of leadership. She'll be back in Congress, and of course, Kevin McCarthy is trying to scrounge together the votes to become Speaker of the House. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the legacy of Nancy Pelosi, the current state of the House of Representatives, and also violence in politics as well, because I know that's on the rise as well, and it's kind of concerning, isn't it?
It is, and we have seen everything from paid protesters that are knocking on doors at the federal level, even at the state level. A couple years ago, we had protesters that showed up at the Pennsylvania Capitol. They caused some mischief there when they were arrested. It was found out that they weren't even Pennsylvania citizens. They were from around the country, and they were being paid to be there to protest. And sometimes those protests, they're not the nonviolent sit-ins that existed in the 1960s and early 70s. These people become agitated and aggravated, and it makes it very difficult for politicians. We look back to the congressional baseball game a couple years ago where shots were fired and we had politicians that were hit. That becomes a larger and larger concern, that there can be violence against people who don't share the same beliefs as you. And that puts a lot of politicians at risk. So, I guess that return to civility continues to be important, because if we're not constantly demonizing the other side, we can say, okay, you see things from this point of view, I see things from this point of view, but we're both humans. We are still going to treat each other with respect and humanity. And hey, we can have dinner and be friends, even if we disagree politically. If we restore civility in politics, I think we'll see less of those dangerous situations. As for Nancy Pelosi's legacy, I don't want to get too much into that topic because I'm not a scholar on everything that she did under her time as speaker. But I think legacy is important to all politicians of all levels. How will we be remembered for our time in office? We've given a great deal personally and professionally. Now, how will we be remembered? And that is of huge concern. I think, Nancy Pelosi definitely has some feathers that she can put in her cap and some things that she'll hold on to as victories. But what her legacy will look like exactly, I think, is something we have to leave to the history books, because sometimes our memories are a little bit different of what happens in real life, in real time. I think back to President George W. Bush and the way 9/11 was handled and the things that he did. I hope that history books think of him in a more positive light than maybe the news portrayed him at that actual time, because it was a tense time in America. But I think he eventually pulled us through things in a way that other people maybe could not have. So the history books hopefully will be more kind to him than the news of his day was. And so you have to look at that when you're talking about political legacies as well, that the way you're remembered is not always the way the media of the day is reporting on that individual.
Isn't that the truth? Absolutely. And, Matthew, I'm also curious to ask you about, I don't have to tell you that all politics starts at the state level, living in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is certainly going to be a swing state for the next presidential election. But I'm wondering if you can tell me how important people should view their state politics, because all major decisions start at the state level, don't they?
They do. And our founding fathers put great pride into states' rights over the federal government's authority. And, I think that's a debate that continues to happen. How much should happen at the state level? How much should happen at the federal level? But there's the old saying that goes, all politics are local, because, a decision can be made at the federal level or at the state level. But really, when it comes down to implementation, it's going to happen on your local level. So individuals, I look at undervotes in presidential elections, and that's where someone goes into the booth, they vote just top a ticket, they just vote for president, they don't go down ticket and vote for the rest. As much as 20% of voters undervote. And so, that's something that's concerning to me. If you're going into that booth and you care about who the president of the United States is, you should care about who the mayor of your city is. Because, like I said, all politics are local. Implementation comes down to the level of government that is closest to you. So those people are of extreme importance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matthew, I've got a two-part question for you in terms of my last political question for you, and that's what frustrates you the most about the state of politics today, and what are you most hopeful for the future of American politics?
Well, I'm going to pick on the politicians a little bit, and I get to do that because I'm a politician myself. What frustrates me the most is the fact that so much of politics has become play acting. I talked about how often you're running for office. You really get no time off when you're not campaigning. So when you're doing your legislative work, there are so many people that want to introduce a bill that has no chance of ever succeeding or getting past the governor in their signature or getting to the president's desk if you're at the federal level. But you do that just for show. And so there's all this play acting that's happening where people are just pandering to their base, the people that elected them, and saying, hey, look at me, I'm doing what you put me here for. But they're not doing the actual work of the people. And, that's what frustrates me the most. We want to focus on things that have realistic possibilities of happening, and we have to come to consensus and cross party lines to make those things happen, especially when the numbers get closer in Congress or in your state house, where you don't have a supermajority to just run ramshaw over the other party. So I guess that's the most frustrating part, is the fact that when you pull back the curtain, you realize that some people are just play acting for their base or for their constituency. And we see this a lot with talking heads on the news. They're just saying things to get the results. They're not actually doing the work of the people. And, I don't mean to paint every politician with a broad brush, because there are people out there doing the good work, but there are a large number of people that, like I said, are just pandering to their base. And that's the most frustrating part of politics.
Yeah, and I guess what gives you the most hope for the future of politics and turning the current state around?
I don't want to say that our situation is hopeless, but I'm not seeing huge indicators that we're coming any closer together than we've been before. I think we need to reform elections. We need to watch where money is coming from in elections. And we as voters need to stand up and say, no, it's time for a change. We're going to do things differently. The number of incumbents that are reelected, that the sheer power of incumbency is kind of frightening in the political sphere. So right now, I'm not seeing a lot of indications that things are getting better, but I think we're at a point to where we as the American citizens need to stand up and say, no, we want people that are going to debate civilly, have conversations, and actually get things done, rather than come to a political stalemate that's right along party lines.
Yeah, and I know, Matthew, that your career transition has turned you back to the business world. So I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about your career transition from politics, how that's going for you, and your current quality of life since you've left the political arena on the state level.
Well, so I will tell you, as leadership elections were happening in Pennsylvania for the House and the Senate in November after the election, I felt a little down. There is a little bit of separation anxiety that you have once you've been living a political lifestyle, and now you are returning to private life. So on one hand, you miss that. On the other hand, I get to spend more quality time with my two kids. I have two sons, 9 and 10, and my beautiful wife. I get to spend more time with them than I did before. So it's been a bittersweet transition from the public sector back into the private sector. I still am dipping my feet in the toes of politics, consulting on some campaigns and doing some other work where I think I can stay connected to state government and to federal government in some ways. But the transition, I guess the best word to use has been bittersweet, because there are things you miss, but on the same token, there are things you gain, like more time to spend, quality time to spend with your family.
Well, once a politician, always a politician, and I know once it's in your blood, it's hard to get it out of it, isn't it? But it also allows you to look at life from a different perspective, doesn't it?
It does, and there's a difference going into the booth to vote when you are not on that ballot and you don't have to worry about what the outcome of tonight's elections will be. You still worry because you're worried about who's going to represent you in the future, but it's not the same as actually being there and being on the ticket. So voting was a different experience this November, not being on the ballot. But you're exactly right. Once that lifestyle is there, and that concern for your community is there, I don't think that's something that ever goes away. And so I've had people, because I kind of stepped away from politics abruptly, I've had a lot of people ask, Matt, what's your future look like? Do you think you'll run for public office again? And I'm cautious to say yes or no, because we don't know what the future will hold for us. We don't know where the opportunities will be, or where we'll feel the need to be called back into service. So I don't know if you'll ever see my name appear back on the ballot. But one thing is for sure, I'm always going to be concerned about the health of my community.
Yeah, just before I ask you my final question, you brought up something that piqued my interest because, as you said throughout our conversation this morning, Matthew, politics is all about service of your constituents and really serving the interest of the people. And in some respect, I think that's lost today in American politics. So do you think there'll ever be a point where we get back to the state of politics where service is sort of the main nucleus of why we run for office versus our own public interest and wanting to hold on to power as politicians? So do you think we'll get back to a state where service is really at the heartbeat of why people run for public office?
I certainly hope so. And, I look back to our forefathers when they put these political offices in place. They were farmers. They were people that operated printers, presses. Excuse me. They were silversmiths, etc. And they would take a brief period of time off of their work to go and to serve their community as a representative in this representative republic. I hope we get back to a point to where it's all about service, because if it's not all about service, then it becomes about ego, or it becomes about personal interests and personal gain. And, we as a society don't benefit from the people that are just there for themselves. We benefit from the people that are actually concerned with their community, and that's why we refer to them as public servants, because it is about service. I think we as American voters can take that into our hands, and we can demand that of the people that are running for office to represent us. We want public servants. We don't want people who are concerned with self-interest. And so I'm hopeful that in the future, there will be more and more people concerned with service than personal interests that get into the political game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matthew, my final question for you this morning has to do with personal and professional legacy as you look at your life, and both personally and professionally, and how you want your legacy to be defined.
I'm someone who's extremely concerned with my legacy. In my time in office, there were some things that I was able to accomplish, and I hope people remember me for those. There were also things that I was able to hold off, changes that my constituents didn't want to see happen. I come from a very conservative area that's made up of a lot of people that hunt for sport, a lot of people that are concerned with the Second Amendment. I was the chairman of the Second Amendment caucus, in the Pennsylvania House for a term, and I took very seriously the role of safeguarding people's constitutionally protected rights. So I hope that is part of my legacy. You know, as politicians, we give a huge amount of ourselves. You know, so it doesn't come with any surprise that we're concerned with how we'll be remembered, and hopefully the history books or the blogs will be kind to my time in office, and will see that I tried to work in a bipartisan manner to accomplish or hold off things that my constituents didn't want during my time in office.
Yeah, and just before I ask you how people can get a hold of you if they're interested, I have one final follow-up political question for you, and that has to do with bipartisanship, Matthew. As you mentioned, it's an important part of serving constituents, but do you think that's dying in today's sort of tutorial political climate where all politicians seem to be more broadly interested in going into their partisan corners? So do you think bipartisanship is dying in American politics, and how do you think we get that back?
You know, I think it's getting more difficult to get bipartisan results, but I think it's something that can be done. And I talked about close numbers in political bodies, and the fact that that you don't have votes to spare on your own side, so you have to cross the aisle to get the votes you need to accomplish something. So I hope that bipartisanship is something we continue to see. There is a lot of bipartisan action that actually happens, so that's a positive to see. But you know, I think again we just return to that civility, to that ability to debate and disagree, and then go out and have dinner with each other and still be friends. As we do that, I think we'll see more bipartisanship in the future.
Oh, well, cheers to more political unity. I'm sure you would agree with that, right? One way,
Absolutely.
One way or the other, we're still serving the same people, right? We're all people at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you're a Republican elected to office like I was, you know, I still have Democrats that are my constituents, so I still have to take their concerns into mind as well. We're serving all the people, not just the people that voted for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Matthew, tell me if people want to get connected with you, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Okay, so I am on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just recently TikTok, Snapchat. Just search for Matthew D as in David Dowling, Dowling. You can also visit MatthewDDowling.com, and you can find links to all of my social, to my show, Commonalities, etc. Also, Commonalities has its own website, commonalities.online. A little bit of a strange URL there, but it's www.commonalities.online. Join us for more important conversations on that episode, or on my 2 weekly episodes of that podcast each week.
Well, fabulous, Matthew. I'm certainly grateful that you found time in your busy schedule to have this important conversation about the state of American politics and how we get back to a more political center. Your work in the space of politics and time on my behalf is most appreciated. And I want to thank you for being here this morning.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm glad that I got to interact with you and with your listeners.